morning, Chairman. We're now live.
Right, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Adults and Community Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee. As you'll see, I am not Councillor Hugo Marfleet. He is presently away, so for this meeting, I'll be presiding in his absence. So before we begin, there was no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors, through reception, and assemble in the car park at the front of the building and await further instructions. I would also like to welcome Councillor Sue Woolley, Executive Councillor, and Martin Samuels, our Executive Director, as well as a whole host of other guests. Other participants will be introduced when we reach their item or when they first speak. The meeting is being streamed in the usual way. Could I ask those here in the chamber to turn on their microphones when speaking and to turn them off again when you have finished? Good morning, Mark. And I'll hand over to Thomas for apologies for absence, please.
Thank you. We have apologies from Councillors Marfleet, Carter, Parking and Young.
Councillor Sneath.
Could I also give Councillor Beaukett's apologies? I'm here representing her. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Therefore, move on to agenda item number 2, which is declarations of members' interest. If you do have anything to declare throughout the meeting, then please let us know. Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Chairman. My usual declaration, I'm a governor of LPFT. Thank you.
And obviously we can take more as we go throughout the meeting. Therefore, moving on to agenda item number 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of June, obviously found on pages 5 to 8 of the agenda pack. Do we have any comments or amendments? No. Therefore, I move for a proposer, please. Councillor Kendrick, I'm happy to second, and all those in favour, please do indicate. And any abstentions? 1. Lovely. Thank you. They are carried. Moving on, announcements. In the absence of the chairman, there is no chairman's announcements. But in terms of executive councillor, I believe Councillor Woolley.
Thank you, Chairman. I may repeat this several times at every opportunity. I think it's a really great, well, I was going to say day for Lincolnshire, but certainly in the last few days, it's been announced that the first cohort from the Lincoln Medical School have completed their training. It's wonderful news, and for those of us that have been around for a very, very long time, when a medical school was just a pipe dream, this truly is a great day. And I would like to also pay special recognition, not only to the university, to all the organisations that have supported it, be that the City Council, the County Council, everyone in Lincolnshire, the lecturers, whoever, but particularly the students who decided that they wanted to come to Lincoln for their training. And more importantly, those students who have decided that Lincoln is going to remain the place where they want to live, work and stay in the vicinity to complete their ongoing training. Because I'm sure, as Councillor Lee will agree with me, they don't just stop after their university course. It's ongoing all the time. So welcome to all of those students. Thank you very much for indulging me.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I'd second that, Chair. I was the MP for Lincoln from 2017 to 19, and it was one of the things that I helped strongly support. But lots of people, it isn't credit to one person, it's credit, as Councillor says, to lots of people. So really, really well done. Huge benefit to Lincoln, huge plus, and I really do hope that some of them stay. We certainly need them.
Yeah, I definitely echo those comments, and it is fantastic news. And thank you, Councillor Woolley, for bringing it to all of our attention. Councillor Sneath, do you have anything on behalf of Councillor Beaukett?
No, I have no announcements.
Therefore, we'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is the all-age autism strategy. This item is found on pages 9 to 46 of the agenda pack. This is the all-age autism strategy, and as you know, this committee's remit focuses on adult services. However, this does not stop us considering autism and its impact on children and young people. However, we do need to give due consideration to services for adults with autism. And I believe we have Justin Hackney, the Assistant Director of Specialist Services, and Catherine Kay, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Head of Commissioning for Mental Health, Learning Disabilities and Autism from NHS Lincolnshire Integrated Care Board. And I'll hand over to you to present your report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do a brief introduction and then Kath will pick up the main presentation, if that's okay. So this agenda item came about through some interest in previous discussions at this committee in relation to the autism agenda, and we proposed that it might be a good idea if we invited Kath along to actually talk about the all-age autism strategy that has been produced in co-production with people with autism in Lincolnshire, and also to talk around some of the priorities for the partnership and that are set out within the strategy as well. Without further ado, I'll pass over to Kath. Kath is also the chair of the All-Age Autism Partnership as well. And then once Kath has completed her presentation, we'll both be open to questions.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. It's greatly appreciated. I co-chair Lincolnshire's Autism Partnership Board with an individual with lived experience, an autistic individual. They have just come to the end of their term, which is why they're not here with me today, Chair, so it's just myself. Can go on to the next slide, please, and the next one, please. So, for context, I just wanted to briefly talk to members in relation to our previous strategy. This was significantly affected by the COVID pandemic in terms of rollout, but really set a precedent for our current autism strategy. Next one, please. So our priorities at that time, we have significant issues for children and young people, more so than adults, in relation to getting a timely diagnosis and support through that process. And transition was recognised as a significant issue for some of our children and young people as they enter adulthood. Priority was for services to make reasonable adjustments and be autism friendly as a county. We're aware that we can't necessarily make things autism specific, but those reasonable adjustments under the Equality Act were a real focus for our attention. I've already mentioned support through transitions and other major life changes. We're seeing a population of older adults, which we didn't see previously, so we're having to prepare for our citizens who are autistic as they enter older adult chapter of their life. Also, the importance of recognising how autism is individual. When you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, and it was really important that through the reasonable adjustment work we allowed for that, and to adapt our support to meet additional needs. And the term challenging behaviour in our new strategy does not appear. Sadly, challenging behaviour was almost used as a mental health diagnosis, so we now talk about behaviours of concern and no longer use that term. And also our family carers were reporting significant stress and strain supporting their individual getting access to services, so that was a focus for the previous strategy. Next slide, please. Thank you. So underpinning the previous strategy, we had 4 working groups. Awareness and training to roll out across our county to raise much needed awareness in relation to autism. The involvement and collaboration working group was 2 groups, and they were led by people with lived experience. So our co-chair, previous co-chair of the Autism Partnership Board, led one, and that was so that the voices of people with lived experience could feed into the partnership board and our strategy work. The other group was a group for people to tell their narrative and tell their story and share their lived experience, because in a partnership board it was very challenging to try and hear people's voices at a very fundamental level, but it was really significant that that fed in. So those 2 groups fed in. Data and information was an area where we were really lacking in Lincolnshire. We didn't have good demographic data for our children and young people or our adults and their family carers. So that group focused on that. And then the service provision working group was bringing together all of the services across our integrated care system. again, to feed into the partnership board and work on the strategy. Thank you. Next slide, please. So these are some of the, and I'm aware that colleagues have had the pack in advance, so I don't propose to focus on these so that we can focus on the up-to-date strategy, but they're just some of the achievements that we made despite the pandemic with our previous strategy. Next slide, please. I do just want to touch briefly on our Transforming Care Liaison Service, because two of the national priorities in our updated strategy relate to individuals who are autistic who find themselves at risk of admission to a mental health hospital or are on an inpatient pathway. And Lincolnshire are bedless for inpatient beds, mental health beds for people who are autistic or people with a learning disability. And we've invested all of that resource in a Transforming Care Liaison Service, which is producing just the most outstanding results for our citizens who sadly find themselves in a hospital setting. They're a liaison service for a reason. If they care coordinated individuals, it would gridlock the service. So they provide that fundamental bridge to other mental health services within the county. And they also host our dynamic support register, which is an NHS England requirement. So anybody with learning disabilities and or autism at risk of admission to a mental health hospital should be on our dynamic support register. So I just wanted to, I guess, give a bit of a shout out to such a phenomenal service that in a really person-centred way is supporting our autistic citizens at this time. Next, please. So in relation to transitions, the pandemic did stall some of our autism champion work, but that's reinvigorated at the moment in the new strategy. And work with Justin and colleagues is ongoing in relation to our wider accommodation strategy. Our autistic citizens still face some quite significant barriers in relation to sourcing suitable accommodation within our county. But work in relation to that is top of our priority. Next, please. Thank you. So, for individuals who communicate their distress through behaviours of concern, I've already mentioned our Transforming Care Liaison Service. We have also developed community forensic services for people with learning disabilities and or people who are autistic. And again, we are seeing some outstanding work. Really, we're an exemplar for certainly the rest of the Midlands, if not nationally, in relation to the work that we're doing to support autistic individuals who sadly find themselves involved with the criminal justice system. Thank you. Next slide, please. In terms of the previous strategy and support for families and carers, you'll all know we're a huge county, but we don't have that many people living here. So if you cross just into Nottinghamshire, there are numerous family support groups, sibling support groups, and we just don't have a wealth of those resources in Lincolnshire. So previously, Lincolnshire Autistic Society were commissioned to host a website with up-to-date information for our citizens who are autistic and their family carers. And I'll come on to what we're doing with that in the new strategy. Thank you. Next slide, please. So, the up-to-date strategy for 2028. This was produced with people with lived experience and their family carers, a really excellent example of co-production at the heart of all of the work that we're doing. So for our Autism Partnership Board, now half of the Autism Partnership Board members are people with lived experience, so either autistic adults or family carers and people who are significant to those autistic citizens. Next slide, please. Thank you. So these are our national priorities in the autism strategy and the refreshed work that is happening. As an Autism Partnership Board, we had an extraordinary meeting last week as a reset, really. Now that we're well into recovery and restoration following the pandemic, There are no working groups that currently sit under the Autism Partnership Board. So we've made the decision that these will be our working groups. There is no need to stray from the national priorities and the priorities that are at the heart of our Lincolnshire autism strategy. So we will be setting up working groups that will commence in August and feed into our quarterly autism partnership boards. Next slide, please. So that's just a summary really of next steps in relation to underpinning the autism strategy as a work plan for each year. And for this year, part of our reset is to establish those working groups. So we now have the advantage of Lincolnshire's virtual autism hub, which set up at the beginning of the year, is hosted by Lincolnshire Partnership Foundation Trust. And again, a really even representation of people with lived experience as well as professionals and the autism care navigators that form part of that hub. So in the previous strategy, Lincolnshire Autistic Society were hosting the information on local support groups. We now have the Autism Hub as that central point for that. So we've reviewed the achievements in the Year 1 work plan. We had mapping sessions with system partners and representatives from our Autism Hub, in addition to what we refer to as experts by experience, and also the significant number of peer mentors that we now have working across LPFT as an organisation. So either people who are autistic or their family carers. So we've decided against task and finish groups, and as I've already alluded to, we're going with the 6 national priorities, and we will have substantive working groups in relation to that for the duration of the strategy. Those working groups will have representation from people with lived experience and professionals, and the lead organisation will be decided for each in August in terms of who it's most relevant to lead. For example, supporting more autistic people into employment, we have a member of the Autism Partnership Board who is autistic and works at Department of Work and Pensions. So there's some obvious synergy with some of the members of the Autism Partnership Board. They will feed into Autism Partnership Board quarterly in terms of their updates, and then those updates will feed up and into the various governance structures that we already have within the integrated care system. So our Year 2 autism strategy work plan won't be signed off in July. That will be signed off in August. And that has purely been delayed because we want this to be co-produced. We spent half a day together and that was quite overwhelming for some of our autistic citizens. So we don't want this to be tokenistic. We want this to be the true co-produced voice of people with lived experience and the professionals that are part of their circle of support. Next slide, please. And next. Thank you. So, I think it's important that whilst the Autism Partnership Board will oversee the application and development of the annual work plan, and this is in our strategy, there need to be clear links with key strategic oversight governance structures. That's where I think we've lost some progress previously, that there was a lot of good work going on in the partnership board, but it wasn't necessarily shared proactively with system partners. So that's something that myself and the new co-chair will be working really hard on over the next 3 to 4 years. So I've already mentioned the governance structures. We feed directly into the Learning Disability and Autism Joint Delivery Board, and then there'll be that high-level oversight and assurance into the MHD-LDA Alliance. Sarah Connery, who chairs the MHD-LDA Alliance, is also a member of the Autism Partnership Board, which is really important for us, for our people with lived experience to have that direct channel of communication. So meeting the autism strategy aims, that aligns, we've made them meaningful and we've aligned them to Lincolnshire and our population. For example, our LEADER programme, our Learning from the Lives and Deaths of People with a Learning Disability and Autism, We don't share many of the national trends, so a focus for our mortality reviews is people from an ethnic minority background, but Lincolnshire's ethnic minority groups are very different to some of our densely populated inner cities. So we were seen as underreporting by NHS England on our leader programme, but actually that was because we didn't have those deaths to report. We're working in partnership with the work that's happening in relation to the suicide strategy. Sadly, we know that our citizens who are autistic face higher chance of living with mental health and also increased risk of suicide. So there's some synergy with other work programmes that are happening elsewhere, and as a partnership board and through our strategy, we don't want to miss those opportunities to do some preventative work that's going to be really significant. As part of our leader programme, we're establishing that autistic people face different health inequalities to people with a learning disability. So whilst there isn't necessarily the increased risk of physical health conditions in an autistic person, the risk of vulnerability in relation to living with addiction and use of substances is far greater than in our individuals with a learning disability. And I've already said in relation to a predisposition to mental health, that all culminates in people struggling to access services. So the reasonable adjustments that an autistic person needs are very different to a person with a learning disability. We're also hoping that through the strategy to make it sustainable and to future-proof for children and adults, we need to look through a neurodevelopmental lens. So having work streams that just look at learning disabilities, that just look at autistic people, we need to take into account our citizens who are also on that neurodevelopmental trajectory. So ADHD, people with tics, Tourette's, and also individuals who have functional neurological disorder. So we have a real focus in line with the Care Act that we focus on people's needs, not on diagnostic labels. So that's going to be a really important part of the work. So we're at an early stage, but the working groups will pick up that momentum, and we'll be producing our Year 3 work plan in November this year to align with funding applications. So that was an opportunity that was missed in the previous year's work plan. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I've already alluded to the virtual autism hub. That's going to be really significant in our success as we move ahead with our 6 primary objectives. We need to make sure that we've got leadership in the right areas in the system to be able to move the agenda forward. And a big part of national strategy work and also our Lincolnshire strategy is that we need leaders in the system who are autistic or family carers who have that lived experience, and the Autism Hub are setting the trend for that and leading by example. So our Autism Hub will be the springboard for a lot of our activity, but we still need the Autism Partnership Board to provide that network and that link into the other governance panels that are there. So, hosted by LPFT, but the Virtual Autism Hub will work across the system. We have significant concerns at the moment in relation to diagnostic weights for children and young people, and I appreciate that this is a predominantly adult forum, but we have a gap in 16 to 18-year-olds at the moment who haven't previously accessed CAMS or paediatrics, and then between the ages of 16 to 18 need an autism diagnostic assessment or ADHD diagnostic assessment. Currently, there is nothing within the NHS for those individuals, and I'm having to commission that from the independent sector. So we know that that will not be as robust. That will be a standalone assessment rather than somebody accessing a pathway. So at the moment, we're 5 meetings in to 6 workshops where we're developing the autism diagnostic and follow-up pathways for children and young people, and that will be significant for yourselves in relation to transition and people accessing adult services. So that's just one example of an area of work where children and young people needs to link in to the work that is happening for adults. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the comprehensive report and excellent work that you've already undertaken on this strategy. I think we probably all know people here that live with autism, and actually I think it will make a positive impact on their lives with the work that I think you are proposing to do. I do have a few questions which I'll indulge myself with first, and then we'll get to Rob and Karen. Lovely, thank you. So we've talked about, I suppose most of the time, I suppose autism seen as a younger person's thing, or that is a presumption, I think, on my lack of knowledge on this one. And I think there will presumably be a lot of a demographic in the older community that are living with autism. And I suppose it's how do we reach them? Because it's almost a case of they're almost missing to a certain extent. So how can we reach them?
We reach them in one of two ways. The first way is really sad. So it's people that have been living with the wrong mental health diagnosis for decades. And it's only when treatment has been unsuccessful for mental health that they then tend to come forward, and maybe a grandchild or a child is diagnosed as autistic, and that then leads the older adult to think, hold on a minute, this absolutely makes sense for me. So we're finding those individuals quite naturalistically. Unfortunately for some of those individuals, they've had 30 or 40 years in mental health services that hasn't worked because they're autistic. So we are gathering the data on those individuals. The most common coexisting condition for autistic people is learning disabilities. So those people those older adults tend to come to attention earlier because the autism is more obvious, especially for our individuals who have quite a severe learning disability and are maybe pre-verbal. Some of the autistic presentation is much more easy to see. But we are gathering data on that and also making sure that there's representation at Autism Partnership Board for older adults as well.
No, thank you. And then one of the last points you raised was around, I think it was the 16 to 18-year-olds in terms of having to go privately to secure a service.
No, they don't go privately. The ICB fund it.
No, yes.
Yeah.
But
Independent sector.
yes, independent sector. Sorry, my lack of knowledge on that one. But surely that's not just an issue we are facing. That must be across the whole country. So surely the NHS should be recognising that to a certain extent. Yeah,
it's a national issue. And stymied to a degree by the fact that we need a neurodevelopmental lens, because very often autistic people are living with other neurodevelopmental conditions. We're seeing massive increase in numbers of requests. My team at the moment are holding ADHD adult referrals. We receive 20 to 30 a day. And that is preventing us doing the work that we're commissioned to do as a team. A lot of people are living with more than one condition. Our waiting lists, whilst they're not great, we're looking at approximately a year. Elsewhere in the country, you're looking at 6 to 7 years. So when numbers were lower for referrals, LPFT adult diagnostic services would kindly take people by exception, but their waiting lists then became so big that wasn't something they were able to offer. So we do only go to one independent sector provider, and we quality monitor and check all of their work, because we're conscious we're taking people from a potential social and communication pathway and just getting them an assessment with not necessarily any follow-up. So it's a significant issue that does need to be addressed nationally, and we do keep raising that, Chair.
Just before I open the chamber, in terms of, just final comment, so autism champions, can you just detail what their sort of role is?
Yeah, of course. So we're only going to achieve widespread change through reasonable adjustments. Autism-specific services are only needed for a handful of people who've got a really complex constellation of needs. needs can be met through reasonable adjustments. So we've rolled out autism champions across LPFT to start with, but our ambition is that we have autism champions in every sector in the county, so in shops, in commerce, in local authority, so that people can come together and with reasonable adjustments meet the needs of autistic citizens. Some of our autistic citizens are very focused on us having specialist services, but the evidence shows us that the majority of individuals don't need that. It's reasonable adjustments and autism-friendly environments. So we have something called a reasonable adjustment mark that, again, initially was for autism-friendly services within LPFT, but working with Sarah Connery and the MHD LDA Alliance, we would like to roll that out across all services in Lincolnshire. So Autism Champions is the start, but the reasonable adjustment mark is the ambition.
Councillor Kendrick.
Thanks very much, Chairman. I'm very interested in the virtual autism hub. What are your plans for publicising that, both within public sector organisations, but also with the wider public? Because I think public education on this is very important. I think there's quite a bit of misunderstanding amongst people about what autism is, and sometimes it's associated with a learning disability where the cognitive ability is reduced, where in fact, obviously, as you well know, a lot of autistic people are actually highly intelligent. So I was just wondering what you're going to do to publicise that. And secondly, Autism Champions, is that something that, for example, we should have in LCC? Thanks, Chairman.
Do you want?
I can come in on the second point. So, yeah, we have already got some autism champions within LCC, but again, it's one of those ongoing matters. As you have turnover, we need to replace those as well, Councillor. But yeah, it also links to some of the CQC recommendations as well. I mean, I think there is something to look at around burnout with champions as well, because you can actually have a champion for autism, a champion for the next issue, and so on and so on. So we are looking at this in the broader sense as well. Within adult care, for example, we're looking at actually having an autism champion within our workforce development team as a central point of excellence. But then actually we're also rolling out national and local training to all of our teams. We've actually looked at the prevalence of autism across our caseloads, and we're targeting that training specifically at those teams with high case holding with people with autism. So there's that sort of work going on an ongoing basis, but just to reassure, we're already looking at that from a LCC point of view. Similarly, we also have people within children's services as well. But it's something that we should look at as well, and look at other areas of the council as well. So we'll do that.
And council colleagues are well represented on the Autism Partnership Board as well, and are just so important as partners in the work that we're doing. We approach everything through the lens of health and social care, and there's no real division in terms of who works in which organisation. In relation to the Virtual Autism Hub, they only started in February. They've now got everybody in post, and it will be publicised on the Hey Lincolnshire site, so that should get word out there. They are also significant members of the Autism Partnership Board as they've come into post, and we're hopeful that somebody from the Autism Hub will put themselves forward as a nomination to be co-chair for the Autism Partnership Board, because that would really get word out there as well. They're involved in the work that we're doing on the children's pathway. So last year, pathways were co-produced for the diagnosis of under 5s and 5 to 18-year-olds. And the Autism Hub are putting themselves forward in terms of signposting for families and children post-diagnosis to be able to navigate what services are where. And also we've given money to the Virtual Autism Hub for grant applications, so £170,000 was awarded earlier in the year. I had the privilege to sit on that panel, because we've got a real inequity across the county in relation to support groups and services in some of our harder to reach communities and some of our harder to reach areas. So in our coastal areas, there are very few support groups. So it gave opportunity for the Autism Hub to encourage people to set up groups all across the county. And there'll be funding allocation every year, so that panel will be something that happens yearly. And the virtual Autism Hub are going out and about to meetings and networks to raise their profile in addition to the Hey Lincolnshire.
Thanks very much. I think it might be useful also for members to receive a briefing on this when it's fully up and running, because we all, of course, have constituents with autism, so it make our awareness much more increased. So if something could be done for members as well,
They'd
I
love
think
that
that'd be
opportunity.
Great. Yeah. Thanks very much, Chairman.
Councillor Lee?
Thanks, Chair. I've just got some questions. First of all, really well done on everything you've done. I commend that. I've got a grandson who's got a degree of autism. He's 12 and he's in mainstream schooling, but I'm aware that he's got a plan. He's got a sister as well that's 8 and she's very loud, and I think he finds her a challenge, but we all do. So I've got, and to be fair, if you ask Ben, if you want to go on a train somewhere in London, they live in Bromley, he knows every single stop and what kind of train it is, so that it can be hugely bright, as you know, it's not just a negative. Anyway, my questions, they're based on casework that I get. So first of all, can you give me a name of an officer? If I've got somebody with a real problem with a child or an adult who has autism, who would I come to at Lincolnshire County Council? Because sometimes you'll go to one officer and then you need to go to another, but it would be good to know who you come to in the first instance. You talked about diagnostic and follow-up process, and I was going to ask a question about what the waiting time was in Lincolnshire to get access to a diagnostic process and a place in some sort of specialist schooling, if that's or in mainstream with support. But I think you said, was it a year around here?
So it varies. We have some real outliers.
Yeah.
But on average, we're looking at around the year mark for children and young people and around the year mark for adults. The challenge with the children's pathway, until we revise it, is that you've got paediatricians sat in United Lincolnshire Hospitals Trust. You've got the speech and language therapists who are so fundamentally important as part of that diagnosis for children and young people who sit in LCHS. And then you've got psychology sitting in LPFT. So just to triangulate that and bring that together, because for a child or young person, the speech and language therapy and the psychological therapy elements are really important. For adults, diagnosis, you're taking a childhood developmental history, but that's a historical feature, and that can be done by 2 assessors. So you're cutting down the weights in relation to that. Justin, I think for you, for the council questions.
Yeah, so, I mean, it depends on the nature of the question and the support that's required, I suppose, in terms of the LCC best contact. So, I mean, the way we're structured in adult care is according to learning disabilities, mental illness, older adults and physical disability. So, as Kath was describing earlier, we look at predominantly looking at reasonable adjustment. So we're looking at eligibility for adult social care, not diagnosis of individual conditions. So if the case was already open to a particular worker, then to discuss with those. However, I mean, John Waters, who you know through our day opportunities, is adult care's representative on the all-age autism strategy and partnership. So again, the virtual hub is a good source of, you know, contact in terms of those matters, and you know that route could be through to, you know, either health colleagues or LCC colleagues. Yeah, I think, but that's probably the best route. In children's services, again, the way that they're structured, it will tend to be picked up by special educational needs, I would imagine. But there may be looked after children with autism as well. So, you know, if it's a specific case holding, then it would be the key worker or the key team, if not virtual hub, if that's helpful. Okay.
Yeah.
And as Councillor Kendrick's already alluded to, a lot of our autistic citizens are academically extreme high achievers. What comes with that is stress and anxiety that sometimes tips into a diagnosable mental health condition. And what the Autism Hub are really wanting to embed in Lincolnshire is that just because somebody is academically off the scale doesn't mean that they don't need support, and actually turning that academic intelligence into everyday functional living skills eludes a lot of very bright autistic individuals. So the Autism Hub are eager that we get that support across the county, because we know that our really academic high achievers are sadly likely to experience some mental health at some point. So again, that prevention and to try and get in there early with support.
Yeah, thanks for that. I will go to the hub next time. I tend to come just to you, just in time. My second question, and again, this is based on casework. What amount of respite is available for parents and carers? Because it feels to me from my previous casework as if children, there's respite, but when they get past that age 18 mark, it just, for the profoundly autistic, it seems to be very, very hard. I've got an ongoing case now.
So we don't have autism specialist respite provision. The majority of our autistic citizens who come into social care for support sit in our mental health social work. And if someone has had a period of time in a mental health hospital under a section of the Mental Health Act, Section 3, ourselves at the ICB would work jointly with Justin's mental health colleagues, and we do organise short-term breaks, respite, in some of our mental health homes that are in the county, because it would be entirely inappropriate for our learning disability short-term breaks if someone has a diagnosis of autism. We've also done really creative individual pieces of work and provided support to people. We had a couple of individuals who actually wanted to go to a hotel, but actually wanted some care going in, so they booked the hotel. We organised the support to go into the hotel. So
just to say, my concern is that for the adult cohort, there's not enough provision for respite care across the county. That's been my experience.
I think there maybe isn't enough specialist provision, but there is enough provision in terms of respite. What we would need to do is do a really bespoke package around an individual.
So, yeah, I mean, in terms of our sort of gap analysis work from a sort of commissioning perspective in the local authority, is something that equally we've identified as something that needs further consideration. We have got short breaks facilities at the moment. There are some challenges with those because of fire regulations, etc. at the moment, but we're working through those. I mean, the other thing that we're in key discussions with Anne-Marie and as well is looking at sort of the unpaid carer support services, looking at also what they offer from our day opportunity services are. So there's a number of different ways potentially that we could help support families. You know, as well, following on from CQC assurance, that is another area that we'll need to feed into the Autism Partnership. And you know, whilst I agree with the Autism Partnership around, you know, there isn't, generally a lot of needs can be met with regional adjustments. We may need to do some more detailed work around autism specific for those people with really complex needs. And certainly we are doing work through that joint accommodation strategy group to look at, you know, step down services and support from when people have been detained under the Mental Health Act, and also sort of the admission avoidance work. So yeah, there is work, further work needed around that gap analysis and business cases, and ultimately, you know, who should pay for those as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. I've got a case that's been ongoing. You've made me think now I'm going to ring later on and check where, because it's really ongoing. It's been a long time.
And I don't know if you've heard of care education and treatment reviews before. So for an individual with a learning disability and or autistic, if there's a risk of admission to hospital, the ICB, it's national policy, part of the Transforming Care agenda, we would convene a community care education and treatment review, and that gives us opportunity, if admission isn't appropriate, to put in a bespoke package of support in the community. So that is open to individuals as well. And the dynamic support register that I mentioned earlier, again, people can self-refer. So I can give Justin the details for how to make a self... Of course you can, yeah, no problem.
I've still got one more. What we did on page 21, is there some benchmarking of that? I'm sure there will be. I'm sure the answer to that is yes. And just a couple of comments, really. First, I think the fact that awareness of autism has gone up might be the reason why referrals have gone up. You know, it was always there. It's just there's more recognition of it. And I'm a bit dubious about, and it's not a criticism of you, but whenever anyone says, oh, the pandemic, I think 2 years ago. That's a long time for people that are waiting for treatment. But yeah, the last one was about the benchmarking. Thank you.
So yes, in relation to benchmarking, we're working with population health management to compare the data and do that benchmarking. So that's running across all of our work streams.
That's all, thank you. Councillor Mrs Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. It's fabulous and so in-depth, and it's clearly a very complex issue now. And now that we're looking at it, as my colleagues have referred to, it's been there a long time, but we're perhaps now getting more referrals because we're more aware and we've got more knowledge. What I want to ask about is those people, and we are dealing with adults, this is it's kind of the adult section of it. Diagnosis is one thing, and how quickly can that be done as a child? That's my first question. We're referring now to health management, but it can be spotted in schools, and as some of my colleagues have already said, and I am aware, that those who may have this particular issue might slip through school under special educational needs, but not being treated properly, if you know what I mean. They are high intelligence, and then will go on into adult life, having gone through all of the trauma that goes through being, you know, not satisfied at school, might have been getting into fights, and might not know that they are on this spectrum. So how then would they speak to somebody about recognising, actually, I think I should have had some help many years ago? Do you know what I mean? Because I am aware of people who are like that, and they are, you know, they're at the higher end of the special educational needs. Gifted children, actually, we would have called them, wouldn't we? And I think perhaps many of those have been missed. So how are we addressing that situation? And are schools fully equipped to recognise that end of special educational needs? Because often we hear about special educational needs, you think about the lower end of special education, not the opposite end, where gifted children probably go unrecognised. So that for me is a real area of concern. And also you touched on housing. So would housing need to be adjusted? What about housing needs? Because obviously people who have this issue don't want to be living at home with their parents. They want to live free, individual lives. So housing is another thing that I need to ask you about. Sorry, it's been a bit convoluted there, but I think you've got the gist of it, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So for children and young people, usually the referral route is through education onto one of the autism diagnostic pathways. So I think as awareness is greater, less people are being missed. And I think it's really significant that the majority of autistic individuals don't sit in the learning disability social care sector. They're sitting in the mental health social care sector. Again, sometimes, sadly, we come at it after a crisis, and that's the point where people start to piece the jigsaw together. In girls or people who identify as female, we know there is significant masking, and that is how those individuals get missed. So whereas we used to think that for every 4 boys or men who were autistic, there was 1 girl or woman, we now think it's more evenly distributed than that, but our girls and our women mask and hide the fact that they're on the spectrum. So those are the cases that still tend to slip through. So we're doing an awful lot of work with all sectors to raise awareness that women or people who identify as female present differently. There are a lot of subtle nuances that there aren't necessarily with our gentlemen. So referral route is through school. I don't think we're missing a significant number. In relation to housing, again, it tends to be our women or people who identify as female who've maybe been in hospital diagnosed with the wrong conditions, and their risk is to themselves, not to others. And in terms of accommodation, it creates challenges. We generally need ground floor because of the risks that stairs introduce for some women. So housing and accommodation, we are well structured for our individuals who have a significant degree of learning disabilities. There is work to do for our autistic individuals who don't have an additional learning disability, but we're on with that, aren't we?
I mean, again, it links, so it depends on the eligible needs of the individual as well. So someone might be living with autism but might not be eligible for adult social care, might not need to engage with specialist mental health services. So I think there's some wider work, and as Kath talked about earlier, within the partnership around the wider community, and actually maybe making reasonable adjustments through our district councils in terms of how to access sort of housing offers and those sort of approaches is on top of what they already do. But as Kath says, then there's that more specialist work through the Joint Accommodation Strategy Group around looking at more specific needs. And we do bespoke tender processes at times, go out to the market for care providers, but they often bring people who can provide accommodation as well. And I'm sure there'll be more work on this scrutiny at some point in the future, but adult care and community wellbeing are initiating work around a wider extra care and community supported living strategy. So we'll need to consider autism as part of that overall strategy as well. So hopefully that answers that part.
And I would just really encourage as well, Councillor Clark, that we start to take a neurodevelopmental lens, because we're developing strategies for individual conditions that all sit on the same constellation. So, the work that we're doing with the children and young people pathway, those services won't necessarily be online at the same point as the services for autism, but we need to, at the back of our mind and in our cases for change and business cases that we're writing, consider people that are also living with ADHD, because ADHD and autism don't rub along well together, and those people face increased challenge. So, and for tics, Tourette's and functional neurological disorders. So when we're mapping for the future, we're mapping as if we're neurodevelopmental services rather than just autism specific.
Thank you. Councillor Whittington.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Listening to the questions and the debate quite keenly, and the point I'm going to raise, I think, has been kind of alluded to by both Councillors Lee and Councillors Clark, and it's around this sort of idea that at the moment, do we really have any total understanding of what the sheer level of demand is out there for these services? Because we've been mentioning that 20, 30, 40 years ago. I mean, I can remember when I was at school, which is going back an awful long time. The children with conditions like ADHD, Asperger's, it just wasn't picked up, or it wasn't recognised, and they were just badged as naughty or whatever. But of course, as we develop and we're making progress, we're becoming more and more aware of these conditions, and we're able to identify them and treat them and whatever. But you said we've also got some hard to reach groups as well. And I'm just thinking, we're obviously on an upward trajectory in terms of identifying demand. Do we know, when will we know what the true level of demand is, or will we never know because of the sheer complexity of it? I'm just trying to wrestle with this idea, because obviously that will then have an impact obviously going forward in terms of your strategies you develop, funding, resources, and all those kinds of things. So that's really what I'm trying to understand. Thank you.
I'll take that question in the first instance. So it is a very complex area, and we do need to do a lot more work in terms of building our understanding of prevalence and future demand. Probably not just in this area, but in other areas as well. And we have got work. So, for example, we're commissioning work with the Social Care Institute of Excellence, looking at mental health demand in Lincolnshire. That works very soon to start. We're looking at demand work as part of our trajectories work with Empower, and that the Better Lives work within adult care that links to the ICS as well. We do have a level of intelligence in the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, but again, that is very much linked to sort of national prevalence statistics and registrations on GP registers, etc. So it to a degree it is fairly limited, and we know that it's underreported, as Kath says. So to a degree there will never be complete accuracy in terms of it. I think the other layer of complexity is, as we've talked about before, it's a single diagnosed condition, whereas a lot of the work we do in resource planning looks more around our primary support reasons in terms of the way we've organised ourselves as, from a budget perspective internally. I think one of the really exciting areas is the population health management work. So Kath talked about, some of the evolving sort of inequalities data that's coming out of that, and whilst it still needs to be developed further, there's some teething issues in terms of sort of initial data quality. It's actually identifying some potentially really, really good stuff in terms of early help and prevention offer, and a way of being able to target some of that support going forward as well. So I think in summary the answer is we may not completely ever know true demand, but we are doing work on this area and other areas to increase our understanding of that, which will improve the effectiveness of service planning and commissioning strategies.
And our demand and capacity modelling work, the population health management has been a real game changer, hasn't it? And that's positively influencing that. And also 10 years ago, I wouldn't have really known about many autistic teachers. I wouldn't have known about many autistic colleagues. But now that's changed, and very often teachers who are autistic or have ADHD or both are spotting that in pupils in their classes. Colleagues are maybe spotting it in fellow employees if family hadn't. So all of the time, as the awareness raises, that brings another challenge, especially with ADHD in adults. We plot the trends in our team when somebody on reality television or somebody on social media shares that they have ADHD, and we see a spike in referrals at those points linked to those age groups. So if it's somebody, a Zoe Ball, the radio DJ, we got a spike in women between 40 and 50 at the point where she shared on social media that she had ADHD. So we have a lot of individuals who don't necessarily have needs but feel that they have that diagnosis, and that is a real challenge when we're trying to rag rate and prioritise people that need that sooner. So I think our rag rating of referrals is something that we're having a real focus on as well. So once those people self-identify or identify through a GP, so that we make sure we see people in an order that's appropriate for their well-being.
Just to finish that off as well, Councillor Whittington, I think you've touched on a really, really important point. I do think it's an area for us collectively as an ICS, and within adult care, to invest in terms of developing this area of intelligence, because not only will it help us deliver better outcomes, but also potentially better value for money as well. So I think there is a significant area to look at here.
Because I know one thing that we're really good at in Lincolnshire, in both adults and children's social services, is early intervention work. So, of course, if we can sort of really identify these people at a really young age and put the support in, and as I say, that is something that we are really, really good at, because it's beneficial all around for everybody. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Very interesting read, lots of information, and looks like we're heading in the right direction. I've got a number of questions. I'll try and give them you one at a time so I don't bamboozle you, as it were. You say there's approximately 6,000 autistic adults who are unemployed. How many of those do you think would not be able to be employed at all anyway because of their condition? They couldn't match anything.
That work is at a really early stage as part of our key priorities. I think there's a difference between people that are not able to be employed and some of our individuals who think they wouldn't be able to be employed. The support within DWP and the fact that they have individuals who are autistic there to support people into employment with recognised disabilities, we think that's work that's going to gather momentum over the next 12 to 24 months. It would be a guess if I said how many I thought. I know in our autistic community there's a lot of anxiety around changes in relation to benefits and personal independence payments, but DWP colleagues are trying to support those individuals through that. I've been working in this field for nearly 40 years, and I think autistic people are really fed up with being asked to volunteer their time rather than having meaningful employment. And I think there's work to do with employers, because actually a lot of the autistic people I have the pleasure to spend time with make great employees.
That was another point I was going to ask, was about employers. Have we got a list of those that would be willing to take people on with certain skills?
No, and that's going to be the reasonable adjustment mark work. So we're wanting to, at the same time, gather that information. I know Lincolnshire Co-op are a great employer. I got somebody who was working there the ability to take their autism assist dog into work with them. So we've got some exemplars of really positive practice, but we need to build on that through the reasonable adjustment mark work so that we're looking after our citizens' well-being when they are gainfully employed.
Right, thank you. And in part of the documentation it says there's an assumption that there are about 13,000 people with autism, and as alluded to, others have got it but don't realise they have it, so the number could be greater. At the moment, how many are we supporting within your organisation?
I'd have to bring that information back. I don't have those exact figures, sorry.
Yeah, because it would be interesting to know the demand that you're trying to support, and then the going forward that could double or treble in time as people become more aware of how they're reacting with everybody.
So we are mapping that, just to reassure you, we are mapping that at the moment. So some individuals are easy to account for than others, and there are hidden pockets of people who've maybe had a diagnosis and haven't had care and support needs. So that's why it's hard. We're well aware of our individuals who need significant support. It's those individuals who maybe we're not as aware, but if we'd got in earlier and done some preventative work, they don't come to our attention when they're in crisis.
Right. And it was mentioned about the hub, the autistic hub. I know you said it was only recently set up. What sort of hit rate are you getting at the moment? Do you know?
No, but I can send that information back by Justin.
Yeah, because again, the publicity side of it, it's a useful tool if people knew where to find it. But there again, there's lots of information out there on the web, and you know, you get yourself lost in a multitude and you can't find the pathway to go down.
So the virtual autism hub will also act in the way that I alluded to Lincolnshire Autistic Society hosting that information side of things. That is now the role of the autism hub as well. So in addition to the care navigators and the people with lived experience working in the virtual autism hub, they will also keep up to date what there is in Lincolnshire, because when it sat with Lincolnshire Autistic Society, it was quite a limited resource, and if a support group folds, you need that updating online as it happens, so that we aren't sending people down a path that isn't going to be helpful. So they will also keep that information up to date in terms of what support there is in the voluntary and third sector.
And with the Autistic Society, do we automatically, when we become aware of people, point them in that direction so they can get further advice or at least have some support?
So we'll point in the direction of the virtual autism hub. Unfortunately, Lincolnshire Autistic Society, and it isn't affiliated to the National Autistic Society, Lincolnshire Autistic Society hasn't been very active for the last 2 to 3 years. So we would generally signpost to PACT as our leading autism charity in Lincolnshire.
Thank you very much for that.
Just a follow-up question from me before I bring this to a close then. So in terms of level of support across the county, do we see a massive difference? Obviously we are a massive geographic county. What's the level of difference across the different areas?
We tend to be quite, for people that have been in significant crisis, we tend to be quite Lincoln-centric, because if somebody's had an admission to a mental health hospital, that's likely to have been in Lincoln. And then very often people choose to settle in or near Lincoln. So massively Lincoln-centric. But in terms of family support groups, so maybe not somebody necessarily needing health or social care support, but Skegness, Mablethorpe, Spalding, Louth, quite under-resourced in terms of third sector and support groups for family.
Do we have any further comments or questions? No? Then on our agenda, page number 9, the action required is that we are asked to consider the strategy and related presentation. I think the proposal I'd like to put forward is that the committee record its support for the Lincolnshire All-Age Autism Strategy 23 to 28 and looks forward to improvements of all aspects of services as a result of the strategy. And perhaps we can request a further update on the actions and improvements in 1 year's time. If somebody's happy to second that. Councillor Kendrick, thank you. And all those in favour, please do indicate. And that is supported. Thank you both very much for your presentation and for your time today. You are very welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you wish. Therefore, we move now on to agenda item number 6, which is the performance report. And this can be found on pages 47 and 74 of the agenda pack. This is the standard quarterly performance report. And I believe Caroline Jackson, our Head of Corporate Performance, is presenting to us.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, everyone. Welcome, everyone. So, yeah, this is quarter 4. It covers the period up to the end of March. I think, as hopefully you've been able to see, it demonstrates really positive performance. We're reporting 20 key performance indicators in the report today. Of those 20 measures, 95% are either exceeding or achieving their targets. That's a really positive level of performance. The targets are set in a challenging manner. They're not easy targets, so I think it should be recognised that that's obviously a really positive position to be in. In terms of the 3 measures that are exceeding their target, one was exceeding in quarter 3 and remains so today, which is the number of alcohol users that left specialist treatment successfully. And I know we've obviously previously discussed that measure at length. The 2 new measures exceeding their targets this quarter. The first one is a request for support for new clients aged 65 plus, where the outcome was no support or low level support. Really positive performance at 95.9%. Just want to make a note at this point that from this quarter onwards and in the framework for next year, we slightly amended the title of this measure to make it as clear as possible. So instead of talking about where the outcome was no support or support of a lower level, we're actually now saying a very subtle difference, but where the outcome was no support or low level support. And that's to clarify and reflect that low-level support is actually quite wide-reaching. It includes our reablement, our wellbeing service, county council universal services in the community, as well as information, advice and guidance. So just for clarity on the measure, but really positive performance. The second measure that's exceeding its target is where adults have been discharged from hospital and remain home 91 days after discharge. Again, really positive improvement, going from 85% to 91%. So in terms of those measures that are achieving their target, there are 16 of those. I won't go through them all. 12 of them were achieving in Q3 and continue to do so. Of the remaining 4, 2 of them dropped from our exceeding range to achieving in this report, but are still performing really well. So permanent admissions to residential and nursing home, and carers who've received a review of their needs. The remaining 2 measures that are achieving their targets are newly reported in Q4, so our annual measures. They are carers who've said they had as much social contact as they would like, and also people who report that services help them have control over their daily life. Again, we've seen improvement in the performance of both of these measures since they were last reported. Both measures do come from surveys out to either carers or service users. The one measure that's not achieving its target is again very familiar to you, which is carers supported in the last 12 months. This hasn't achieved its target all year. We've discussed it, I know, previously at length, and obviously we are looking and have looked at fundamentally reviewing the target in the 24-25 framework, which we'll talk about later. As we know, when we've talked about this previously, the target was set a number of years ago. We have now taken into account the new carer service model that went live in October 2022, and you'll see the details in the 24-25 framework of the target that has been set. But before we move on to that, I'll just pause now if there's any questions around Q4. Oh, okay. Oh.
It's not so much a question, more an observation, because it's a really well written report, which is very, very easy to follow. You know, when 95% are achieving their target, it's very, very little that we can really do in terms of ask questions. But for me, that's good. The fact that we are achieving the vast majority of the targets. So I think it's more, the comment would be very well done, and let's and obviously the challenge is to keep achieving those targets. Thank you.
I mean, Martin, is there anything you want to highlight on this first part of the report?
And I suppose that it's clear that Lincolnshire is doing well, that adult social care and more generally across the directorate, we're doing well, which is really pleasing and a very good position to be in it. It's important, of course, that we don't fall into the trap of sort of admiring our performance and saying, well, that's good, isn't it? And not going forward from that. And I think that we're at a time that's actually really interesting and really exciting from a performance perspective, actually in the sector nationally. And there's really 2 things I think that I'd want to sort of highlight that are affecting that. The first is the mixed joy that we're getting from assurance of adult social care functions by the CQC of local authorities. So for the first time in well over a decade, members of the committee will be aware that the CQC has been tasked with assuring not just the provision of services, but the way in which those services are commissioned by local authorities. One of the consequences of that is that the CQC is progressively setting up a standardised set of data that they want to see. And one of our challenges, and you'll have seen it in Caroline's report, that there are a number of areas where we say, well, we can't benchmark our performance because we measure it in a different way from elsewhere. As the CQC progress in their assurance process, and I have to say I think there remain a significant number of questions about the robustness of their methodology, but nonetheless, as they're moving forward and they come into increasingly a standardised set of data, we will need to collect our data and present our data in that standardised form. that will involve some changes for us, but one consequence of it will be that it'd be very straightforward for us to compare ourselves with 152 other authorities. And it's worth noting that that transition happened in the children's world some years ago, and there is now a very standard way of collecting children's services data and presenting it in ways that give you very strong and robust benchmarking data, and that is enormously powerful in the ability to say, well, actually, how are we doing? We may be hitting our target, but is the rest of the country catching up on us? Are we hitting our target, but we set the target at a level that's actually lower than everyone else? Are we way above where everyone else is? And I think that ability to benchmark is incredibly important. And we are at that exciting time where it is becoming much easier for us to do that than it has been at any time for the last, over the last decade. The other aspect that is extremely exciting is that we've now moved to client-level data being collected nationally. And again, as we increasingly measure that data on a standardised, we report that data on a standardised manner nationally, Caroline and Kevin and their teams will be able to access that data on an anonymised basis so that we can actually cut the questions and cut the data in the ways that are interesting to us. So we're not reliant on a small number of standardised ways of doing these, because the data is collected on a standardised manner and it's at client level reporting. We can then pull out, we can ask much more sophisticated questions than we ever could before to give a really a deep understanding of where we are. And that will allow us therefore to ask particular questions, to compare ourselves with our geographic neighbours, with our statistical neighbours, and to get a real sense of, so how are we performing compared to other areas? And my experience of having done this elsewhere is that doesn't give you any answers, but it gives you some clear areas where you can say, well, we need to know a bit more about this. And what that can then allow you to do is to identify 2 or 3 other authorities that are sufficiently similar in nature to us but different in performance, and you have a conversation with them. And when I've done that in previous authorities, the results of that can be incredibly eye-opening. I've talked to councils and discovered that the way they had arranged services, the capacity they put into certain areas, was radically different from the way that services in my area were designed, and it became clear that they were performing much better than we were because of that. But if we hadn't had the benchmarking data, we'd never have known. We'd never been able to do that. So the fact that we're getting standardized data now increasingly being measured in a standardized manner, and then the client level data allows us to ask questions in a much more sophisticated way, I think that gives us the potential to really move forward and to get a clear sense of how we're doing now. And then we can use the population health management data that the public health team are collecting to say, well, what do we think is going to happen in the future as Lincolnshire changes? We know that there are significant changes in demography in the county forecast over the next several years, and we can take that level of data that we've got, look at the demography, at the changes, and really work out what demand is likely to look like in future years, and therefore that can guide us as to how we need to redesign and shape our services. So we're at a stage where we can go from what I sometimes slightly crawly talk, we can sometimes just admire the position. We can go to a situation where we're now actually responding to it and doing something more about it in a way that would have been much more difficult in the past. But we have a level of data, and as I say, with Caroline and Kevin in the team, giving us a real sense of intelligence about where we are. So I think it's a very exciting time. So we'll be able to take that good performance and not only maintain it, but develop it to meet Lincolnshire as it changes over the coming years. Sorry, that was a bit longer than intended, but hopefully useful.
Yeah, it's very comprehensive. Caroline, do you want to finish your report, or Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Chairman. Allow me to interject here. I was pleased to hear there that you were saying that we are going out to other organisations and, as it were, looking at their best practices and then bringing them back to us. Because obviously, in some respects, it works the other way, that we can educate other authorities. But this networking arrangement, I think, is ideal. If more authorities and more businesses did that, I think we'd be a lot better off as a country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the 24-25 framework, so page 71 in your pack, we have kept, as Martin has said, a lot of the measures the same this year because of the changes haven't quite come on board yet in terms of what Martin's referred to. So this next year will be a very broadly similar set of metrics. We have made some changes. Firstly, PI 31, which is around the number of alcohol users that left specialist treatment successfully. Again, previous conversations you'll be aware of, the definition of the indicator has been revised slightly. It aligns more with the activity that we're undertaking and around the National Drug Treatment Monitoring System. So it will track the number of clients in treatment in the last 12 months who successfully completed their treatment. So it's just a slight nuance in the definition. We've also updated the target around PI 111, which is around the people supported to successfully quit smoking. We have increased the target substantially for this measure. This is because we expect that the expansion of the service that has been undertaken and is part of a procurement process will mean we'll see increased numbers of people accessing that service. So once those expanded services are in place, we should see that take up and support people to successfully quit smoking significantly increase. As I previously mentioned, we've also reset the target for PI 59 around carers supported in the last 12 months. This is aligning with our strengthened definition of support in the recommissioned service. So we better reflect the term and the intent of carers being supported. What I mean by that is previously when the target was set a number of years ago, carers being supported could be around just providing them with a leaflet, but actually this is about meaningful support to carers. Not that a leaflet isn't meaningful, but I think in terms of on the spectrum of meaningfulness, we want it to be that they really feel supported. So that's why we have lowered the target for that measure, but because of that strengthened definition. We've actually added 3 what we call contextual measures, and those of you that are familiar with the corporate plan are aware that we have contextual measures within the corporate plan. So those are measures where we don't actually set a target, but we feel that reporting them into the committee is really helpful in terms of some of the contextual reporting, so understanding the wider context around adult care and community wellbeing. So those measures that we've added are shown as new on the framework. They are PI 194, which is around personal wellbeing estimates. So this is around life satisfaction, whether people feel happy and worthwhile. So there is no target set, but it's contextual information. So understanding around how people feel in terms of their personal wellbeing. The second measure is PI 195. Again, this was a measure that was in the corporate plan but feels better sat here, which is around the annual concentration of air pollution and fine particle matter. Again, can really have an impact on people's health in terms of the environment that they live within. And PI 196, which is the percentage of households in an area that experience fuel poverty. Again, we know that the impact on people that live in those environments and that can have on their maybe potentially their social care needs. So they are contextual measures that we are proposing to include. So I'll now hand over.
Thank you. I think the first couple of comments from me, and then I'll go to Councillor Whittington and Councillor Lee. So it's interesting, we still talk about, obviously, quitting smoking, and obviously, I think it is, but I think the other one that I think I'd like to see people quitting is vaping, actually. I think it's the most disgusting thing, and the smell. But there is a massive rise in people vaping at all ages, and you see it from, school education all the way through to elderly people, and I don't know whether or not we'll eventually get to a point where we actually promote the stopping of vaping as well. I hear that on. Lee's going to answer that one.
No, I just wanted to ask Caroline. I couldn't write quick enough that information that you you gave us, and it was really good information. I can't see it in here. Can we have an email just with that? Something very basic.
The frame is on page 73, and those 3 new measures are at the bottom of that table on page 73, and they show the 3 contextual measures. They're marked as new and contextual.
Thanks, I was on page 71.
Okay.
Just on the contextual ones, though, I mean, obviously we put, life satisfaction, happy. I mean, how are we measuring that?
That one is a national measure, and I think there's a series of questionnaires that, and I think it's done through a series of questionnaires and focus groups. I think it's one of those, isn't it? It's always subjective. You can ask, any of us probably on any given day of the week how happy we feel, and that could be quite different if on any given day. But I think it's about getting an indication, and particularly when you compare year on year, and also if we look at how that breaks down in terms of our locality, in terms of are we seeing that generally holding firm, are we seeing it improve, are we seeing it a trajectory. So I think it's useful contextual information.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, it was around the contextual ones that I was going to speak, because one of them you've got in there is around air quality. Now, obviously, I know I'm board to be aware that some district councils currently do measure their air quality, and I know South Kest even do. And as a result of doing that, especially in Grantham, I've been able to identify 2 or 3 hotspots, as it were, where the air pollution has reached a dangerous level. I mean, would you be working with local authority, with the districts around this, especially those that are monitoring air quality? Because whilst it's probably saying there's very little we can do about it, but probably the thing we could do about it is to highlight to people that potentially these are the hotspot areas in Lincolnshire, just so people are aware. I mean, and then they can then take their own precautions, because at the moment I don't think there's any requirements that we do any. I'm not sure if there's any requirements that we do any enforcement around it, but just really as a general public information item. Thank you.
Yeah, so just in terms of air quality monitoring, Councillor Whitton, you're quite right. The district councils have the responsibility for monitoring. There is also a national network of air quality monitoring stations that information is derived from for areas that do not monitor locally. So part of the public health response is to work with district councils on their air quality strategies that they're required to produce, to make sure that the actions that they are looking to implement will have an improvement. And as you say, many of those are actually around behaviours, particularly around transport. One of the largest contributors is products of combustion, and vehicles being one of those. So we do work closely with the districts to ensure that actions they put in place are as effective as they can be. And of course we have in our growth directorate active travel officers who also work with the individuals to promote alternative ways of transport.
Any further comments from the committee? No? Then we'll move on to the recommendation, and I will propose that the committee record its support for the Lincolnshire... to consider and comment on the Adult Care and Community Wellbeing Service Level Performance for 23-24 Quarter 4, and to review... No, sorry, that's... It's all right, Hugo's back at the next meeting, it's fine. The proposal will be that the committee note that 19 of the 20 measures have either achieved or exceeded their target during Quarter 4, and the committee record its satisfaction with the efforts made to meet or exceed these targets, and that the performance measures for 24-25, which are set out in Appendix A to the report, be supported. I'm happy to propose that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Whittington. All those in favour, please do indicate, and that is unanimous. We then move on to agenda item number 7, our work programme. This item can be found on page 75 to 83 of the agenda pack, and I believe, Simon, you're going to talk us through this.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could draw the committee's attention to page 76, there are 6 items on the list for the September meeting, and just 2 for October. So there is a proposal to take 2 of the items from the September list and put them on the October list. They would be, and I haven't consulted with officers yet, but they would be the Days Services update and the follow-up report by on the Director of Public Health's annual report. So it's those two items which would perhaps balance out the, if you like, the programme during the autumn. Thank you, Chairman.
Any comments on that? Well, I think we've got agreement on that one. Wonderful. Therefore, that brings us to the end of our meeting. Thank you all very much for attending, and thank you to the officers that have provided their reports. And I'll look forward to seeing you at our next meeting in September. Have a lovely summer.